He brought her to the party to make her the laughingstock of the city. She was merely his servant, a widow, impoverished, nameless woman, the one who each morning placed his coffee cup on his desk and bowed before leaving. But when the silver doors opened and she entered the ballroom in her turquoise dress, the entire room fell silent. And the most powerful tycoons of Chicago, men who never bowed to anyone, rose one by one. They recognized her. He didn't. Follow this story to the end. Like and comment the city you're viewing so I know how far my story has progressed. The alarm went off at 4:45 in the morning, same as every other day, and Serafina Vale did not hit snooze. She never hit snooze. Snooze was a luxury that belonged to people who had someone else to take care of things. She had no one. Just herself, a 6-year-old girl asleep down the hall, and a job that started before the city woke up. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and pressed her palms flat against her thighs. Breathed. The apartment was cold. The radiator had been dying since November and the landlord had stopped returning her calls after October. She could see her breath in the dim glow from the streetlight outside. She pulled her uniform from the hook behind the door, the one she laundered every night because she only owned 2, and she dressed without turning on the light so she wouldn't wake Lily. Lily, who was 6, who had her father's jaw and her mother's eyes, who believed that her mother worked in a big house because their family was important. Serafina had never corrected her. She checked the deadbolt twice. She always checked twice. Then she walked the 11 blocks to the Moretti estate in the pre-dawn Chicago cold, her breath trailing behind her in white threads, her shoes thin enough that she could feel the sidewalk through the soles. The Moretti estate was not a house. It was a statement. 12,000 square feet of limestone and wrought iron sitting behind a gate that cost more than her apartment building. Security cameras at every corner. 2 guards at the front, 2 at the back, rotating shifts. The kind of place that made you understand very quickly and very quietly that you had entered a different world, one where the rules were written by a single man, and that man did not explain himself to anyone. Dante Moretti. She had worked for him for 3 years. In 3 years, he had spoken directly to her maybe 40 times. She had counted, in the beginning, without meaning to. 40 times. Never by name. It was always you. You, the coffee's cold, or you, someone left a window open, as though naming her would require acknowledging that she existed as a human being rather than a function of his household. She told herself it didn't matter. She needed the pay. She needed the job. She needed the invisibility. What she could not afford, under any circumstances, was to be seen. Matt. The kitchen staff arrived in waves. Rosa, who ran the kitchen with the controlled energy of a woman who had survived 3 previous employers and had opinions about all of them. Tomas, who washed dishes and spoke only in fragments of Spanish and English that somehow conveyed everything necessary. And Marcus, who did general maintenance and watched everyone with the mild, unreadable expression of a man gathering information he had no intention of sharing. Serafina moved through the kitchen without conversation. She prepared the morning tray, coffee, black, 2 sugars, a single folded newspaper, and carried it up the back stairs to the 2nd floor. She knocked on the study door. Did not wait. Opened it, set the tray on the desk, adjusted the newspaper so the fold faced him, and turned to leave. Closed the door. His voice was like that, flat, not loud. The kind of voice that didn't need volume because it had never once failed to be obeyed. She closed the door and stood facing it. Turn around. She turned. Dante Moretti was 38 years old and looked like he'd been made by someone with a preference for sharp edges, dark hair, dark eyes, a face that might have been handsome in a different life but had been carved into something harder by years of doing things that required a face like that. He was sitting behind the desk in a charcoal shirt, collar open, sleeves rolled to the elbows, a pen held loosely between 2 fingers like he'd forgotten it was there. He was looking at her the way he looked at most things, like he was already bored by it but needed to assess it anyway. The Black Crown Ball is Saturday, he said. She said nothing because he hadn't asked a question. I need an escort for the evening. He set the pen down. You will attend. The silence in the room changed texture. I'm sorry? I didn't ask you to be sorry. I said you'll attend. He picked up the newspaper. Dress will be provided. You'll arrive with the household staff and be presented as my personal guest for the evening. Rosa will give you the details. He opened the paper. She stood there. That's all, he said. She left. She found Rosa in the kitchen, and Rosa looked at her face and immediately stopped chopping the onion she'd been reducing to rubble. What happened? He wants me at the ball Saturday. Rosa put the knife down slowly, the way people do when they need both hands free in case they have to catch something. He said that. He said that. Rosa was quiet for a moment. She was a woman who had seen a great deal and processed most of it in silence. Did he say why? No. Rosa turned back to her onions. Then there's a reason you won't like. Serafina already knew that. She'd known it the moment she turned around and saw his expression. That particular brand of indifferent amusement that Dante Moretti wore when he had decided something was going to be entertaining. She was going to be entertaining. She understood it then with the clarity of cold water thrown on a sleeping face. The Black Crown Ball was the most exclusive event in Chicago's criminal landscape. Every family, every boss, every politician in their back pocket, they would all be there. And Dante Moretti intended to walk in with his maid on his arm and let every single one of them watch. The cruelty of it was almost elegant. That evening, after her shift ended and she had walked the 11 blocks home and fed Lily dinner and listened to her daughter describe in extraordinary detail a disagreement between two girls at school that had apparently been resolved by someone's sandwich being stepped on, Serafina sat at the kitchen table after Lily was asleep and stared at the surface of her tea going cold. She could refuse. The thought came and she let it sit there. She could say no. She could say she wasn't available, she had obligations, she had her daughter to care for. She could say any number of things that were true and reasonable and would accomplish absolutely nothing because Dante Moretti did not accept the word no from members of his household any more than gravity accepted negotiations. If she refused, she would lose the job. And if she lost the job, she would be unable to pay rent by February. And if she could not pay rent, she pressed the thought down before it could open into something she couldn't close again. She could not refuse. What she could do was survive it. She'd survived worse. She knew how to survive things. That was, in fact, the one skill she had cultivated with more discipline and precision than anything else in her life. And it had served her for 11 years. And she was not going to let one man's cruel game undo it. She poured the cold tea down the drain and went to bed. The dress arrived on Thursday, delivered by a woman from some boutique who didn't introduce herself and spoke only to tell Serafina to try it on and stand still while she made 2 minor adjustments with pins. It was emerald green, long, structured, cut from fabric that moved like liquid. The kind of dress that cost more than Serafina's monthly salary, probably several times over. The kind of dress that was almost, and this was clearly intentional, almost too good, in the way that a well-dressed prop was still a prop. She stood in front of the narrow bathroom mirror in it. The woman with the pins was gone. The apartment was quiet. Lily was at her neighbor Mrs. Okafor's for the evening. Serafina looked at herself for a long time. She looked at the line of her shoulders, the way the fabric sat against her collarbone, the particular quality of stillness in her own face that she had taught herself over a long time, through a great deal of effort, to maintain under conditions that would have broken something in someone who hadn't learned to build walls from the inside out. She reached up and pulled 2 pins from her hair and let it down. She didn't recognize herself for a moment. Then she did. She put her hair back up, hung the dress on the hook behind the door, and made herself dinner. Saturday arrived the way bad days always do, with ordinary light and ordinary sounds that gave nothing away. Serafina arranged her makeup with the precision of a woman applying armor, borrowed earrings from Mrs. Okafor, who asked no questions, and offered them with the particular grace of a woman who understood that some things didn't need to be explained. She was driven to the estate at 7, put on the dress in one of the back rooms, the kind of room that the family used for overflow storage. No mirror larger than her hand. She did what she could with what she had. Rosa found her in the hallway and looked at her for a long moment. "You look—" "Don't," Serafina said. Rosa closed her mouth. The sound of the ball reached them before they reached it. The low orchestral movement. The particular hum of 200 conversations happening simultaneously in a space designed to amplify wealth. Serafina had worked enough of these events to know what they sounded like from the staff entrance. from the kitchen, from behind the service doors. She had never walked through the front. She stood at the top of the short corridor that led to the main hall's side entrance, waiting for the signal from the event coordinator, a man named Prescott, who smelled of hair product and professional anxiety. "Mr. Moretti's guest," Prescott said, not looking at her. "You'll enter from the main doors. He'll be on the floor already. You cross to him directly." "The main doors?" "Mr. Moretti's instructions." Of course they were. She breathed in, felt the cold of the corridor against her arms, felt the weight of the earrings at her ears, the length of the dress against her ankles, the heels on borrowed time. The main doors were tall, silver, and shut. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs, same as she did every morning in the cold apartment. Every morning before she faced another day of being invisible in someone else's house. The same gesture, the same 10 seconds. Then she nodded to the attendant at the door. He opened it. The sound came first. The specific physical cut of 200 voices going silent in rapid succession. The way a wave breaks, not all at once, but in a chain, each pocket of conversation dying as the one next to it died, until the entire room was holding a breath that had once been a roar. Then the light. The chandelier overhead throwing gold across the room, across the gathered faces, across the tables, and the flowers and the men in black tie and the women in their jewels. Serafina walked. She did not rush. She did not look down at the floor. She looked straight ahead, at the far end of the room, at the distance she needed to cross, and she walked the way she had once been taught to walk before she had learned to make herself small. Spine long, head level, weight distributed, nothing wasted. The silence followed her like a second dress. She was halfway across the floor when she became aware of the movement. Not toward her, but vertical. A man to her left rising from his seat, then another, 2 tables to her right. Then a third, then a fourth. Not applause, not yet. Just the involuntary physical response of people who had been sitting and found themselves, without quite deciding to, standing. She did not let herself look at them. She kept walking. She found Dante Moretti at the center of the room near the bar, a glass in his hand surrounded by 3 men in conversation that had clearly stopped the moment the doors opened. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on his face in 3 years, an expression that was not boredom, not indifference, not the particular flavor of contemptuous amusement that had been the currency of his attention since she'd started in his house. He looked like he didn't know what he was looking at. She stopped in front of him. She held his gaze. Said nothing, because there was nothing that needed to be said in this moment that her presence wasn't already saying. "Serafina, he started. "Mr. Moretti." Her voice was even, quiet. "I believe I'm your guest this evening." She saw it happen, saw the precise moment when the social current in the room shifted in a way that even Dante Moretti, who had been navigating the politics of this world for 2 decades, couldn't fully parse in real time. She saw him glance at the man to his left. She saw something change in his face. Not understanding, not yet, but the first crack in his certainty. The first small fissure in the absolute confidence of a man who had never once miscalculated a room. He looked at the men who were standing. He looked at her. "Who are you?" he said, and it was not quite a question. Before she could answer, before anyone could answer, a hand came down gently on her shoulder from behind. She turned. The man standing there was in his 60s, silver-haired, the kind of broad, settled gravity that comes not from size but from decades of command. He was looking at her with an expression she had not expected to see on any face in this room. Not awe, not confusion, but something quieter and far more dangerous. Recognition. He said, in a voice low enough that only she and Dante could hear, "My God, you have your mother's face." The glass in Dante Moretti's hand stopped moving. Serafina felt the breath leave her body. She held herself still, held herself together with the same practiced internal architecture that had held her together through things this man could not imagine. And she looked at the silver-haired stranger and said nothing. Around them, in the beautiful, expensive, chandelier-lit room, the silence continued. And in it, 11 years of careful invisibility began, quietly, irreversibly, to crack. The silver-haired man's name was Victor Hale. Serafina knew that name the way she knew the sound of her own heartbeat. Not because she had heard it recently, but because it had been one of the last names spoken in a burning house 11 years ago. Spoken by a man whose mouth was full of blood. Spoken like a warning that arrived 11 seconds too late to be useful. She did not move. She did not let her face change. She had practiced this, the specific discipline of receiving catastrophic information without letting it reach her eyes. And she practiced it now, standing in the middle of Dante Moretti's ballroom in a dress that cost more than her rent, with Victor Hale's hand still resting on her shoulder like he had every right in the world to touch her. "I think," she said quietly, "you have me confused with someone else." Hale smiled. It was not an unkind smile, which made it worse. "I don't think I do, my dear." Dante was watching this exchange with the particular stillness of a man whose instincts are faster than his understanding. He didn't know what was happening. But he knew something was happening, and in 2 decades of running the most dangerous criminal organization in the Midwest, he had learned that the thing he couldn't identify was always the thing most likely to kill him. "Victor," his voice cut between them like a blade, "you know my guest." "I know who she is," Hale said, and the distinction in those 4 words was precise and deliberate and landed in the room the way a stone lands in still water. The surface impact small, the circles spreading out immediately and without mercy. Serafina stepped back from Hale's hand. 1 step. Controlled. She turned to face the room and found that the standing men had not sat back down, and that 3 more had joined them, and that the faces she could now see clearly, the ones turned toward her across the white tablecloths and the flower arrangements and the candlelight, were not wearing the expression of people watching entertainment. They were wearing the expression of people recalculating. "I need some air," she said to no one in particular, and walked toward the terrace doors without waiting for permission from anyone, which was, she understood, already a statement. Dante followed her. She had expected that. She reached the terrace and stopped at the stone railing and put both hands on the cold surface and looked out at the garden lights below. And she heard his footsteps behind her and heard the door close and heard him stop 3 feet away and say nothing for a full 7 seconds, which told her more about the state of his mind than any sentence would have. "Talk," he said finally. "About what?" "Don't." The single word was sharp enough to draw blood. "Don't do that thing where you stand there and say nothing and make me feel like I'm asking the wrong questions. Who are you?" "I'm your maid, Mr. Moretti." "That's not what Hale thinks." She turned from the railing, faced him. In the garden light he looked harder than he did in his study, the planes of his face more severe, the darkness behind his eyes more visible. He was holding his glass, but he had stopped drinking from it at some point, and now it was just something for his hand to do. "Victor Hale is an old man who has been drinking since 6 o'clock, she said. "Whatever he thinks he recognizes, 16 men stood up when you walked into that room." His voice was low, controlled. The kind of controlled that meant the control was costing him something. 16. I know those men. I've sat across from them. I've buried 2 of them. Not literally, but we don't need to split hairs. Not one of them has stood up for anything in the last 20 years that didn't benefit them financially. So who the hell are you that they stand up? She held his gaze. "I don't know what they think they saw." Serafina. It was the first time in 3 years he had used her name. The specific weight of it, spoken by his voice in that particular way, not commanding, not indifferent, but something she couldn't immediately categorize, went through her like a current. She looked away from him, back to the garden lights. "I need the rest of this evening to go smoothly," she said. "That's all I'm asking." "You're not in a position to ask me for anything." "I know." "Then what are you doing?" She didn't answer that. She wasn't sure she could. The door opened behind them, and Marcus, Dante's head of security, not the maintenance Marcus from the kitchen, a different man with the same name and an entirely different history, appeared in the frame. His face was the kind of face that delivered bad news efficiently. "Boss, you need to come inside." Dante looked at Serafina for another 2 seconds. Then he walked past her and went inside, and she stood on the terrace alone with the cold and the garden lights, and the knowledge that the thing she had spent 11 years running from had just stood up in a ballroom and said her name. Inside, the temperature had changed. Not the actual temperature. The event staff maintained the room at 68 degrees with the reliability of a machine, But the social temperature, the invisible thermometer that measures how much danger is currently present in a given space. Serafina felt it when she came back through the terrace doors. The orchestra was still playing. Guests were still moving, still lifting glasses, still performing the choreography of wealth and ease. But underneath it, something had shifted on the tectonic level. Conversations that had been open were now half closed, bodies angled inward, voices dropped half a register. She took a glass of water from a passing tray and moved along the edge of the room. A woman stopped her. She was perhaps 50, sleekly dressed in black, with eyes the color of old gunmetal, and the posture of someone who had never once in her life been uncertain about where she stood in any given room. "Alara Voss," the woman said, extending a hand. Serafina shook it, said nothing. "I knew your father," Alara said, with the conversational ease of someone commenting on the weather. "Briefly, he was extraordinary." "I think you have me confused with, I don't." Alara's grip didn't loosen. "And I think you know I don't, so let's not waste each other's time with that, shall we? I have a table at the back. I'd like 10 minutes. I'm here as Mr. Moretti's guest." "Yes, I noticed his expression when you walked in. He looked like a man who has just realized the joke is on him." Alara released her hand. 10 minutes. Then you can go back to being his property if that's what you've decided this evening requires." It was the word property that did it. Said without heat, without any intent to wound, just as a simple description of the dynamic she had observed. And the fact that it was accurate was what made it go in sharp. Serafina followed her to the back table. They sat across from each other in a corner where the noise of the room provided more cover than silence would have. Alara Voss poured herself wine she didn't drink and set the glass between them like a prop. "Your father's estate," she said without preamble, "was never formally dissolved." "My father is dead." "Yes. Murdered. By people currently in this room." Alara said it the way you say something you've said many times in your own head and have finally run out of reasons not to say aloud. "The Ashcroft holdings, the legitimate ones, the real estate, the import licenses, the financial instruments, were placed into a trust when the family was declared legally dead. That trust has been generating revenue for 11 years. It was supposed to be absorbed by the consortium that arranged the massacre. It wasn't." Serafina's hands were flat on the tablecloth. She was watching Alara's face. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because the trust requires a living heir to dissolve it, and because several people in this room have been trying to locate and eliminate that heir for over a decade, and because you have just, with extraordinary recklessness, if I may say so, made yourself visible in a room full of those people." Alara tilted her head. "Or did you plan this?" "I didn't plan anything. I was brought here." Something shifted in Alara's expression. "By Moretti?" "Yes." A pause. Alara looked at her wine glass. "Does he know?" "No." "That's," Alara said slowly, "either very good or very bad. I haven't decided yet." "Who arranged it?" Serafina kept her voice absolutely level. "Who arranged my family's death? I want names." Alara looked at her for a long moment. "I'll give you 2. The other 3 you'll have to find yourself." She leaned forward slightly. "Vincent Caro and Thomas Reach." Serafina knew those names too. They were not names from her childhood. They were names from a document she had been carrying in various forms for 11 years, on paper, on encrypted drives, in her memory. A document that had been the one thing her father managed to transmit to her before the house burned. "Caro is here tonight," she said, "at the table nearest the east window. He's been watching you since you walked in. He recognized you." Alara sat back. "He's also been on his phone for the last 15 minutes, which means he's already made calls, which means tonight just became something different than it started as." Serafina pushed her chair back slightly. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Moretti's people—" Alara stopped. "What?" "His organization. Some of his senior men." Alara turned her glass slowly by the stem. "They were not uninvolved in what happened to your family. I don't know how deep it goes. I don't know if he knows. But if you're standing next to him when this comes out, you need to be very clear about which direction to run." Serafina stood. She smoothed the front of her dress. She looked across the ballroom at the east window, at the table where a man named Vincent Caro was sitting with his phone face down now on the tablecloth, and his eyes fixed on her with an expression that was not surprise. Surprise had passed, but calculation. She looked at him long enough for him to know she was looking. Then she turned away. But she found Dante at the bar. He was alone, which was unusual, and his glass was fresh, which meant Marcus had delivered news that required a drink. He was watching the room over the rim with the patient attention of a man who has spent 20 years learning to read a situation by watching the way people move through it. He saw her coming and didn't move. Let her come to him. "There's a man at the east window," she said. "Caro. I know. He's been on his phone." "Do you know why?" Dante looked at her sideways. "I'm starting to think you might." She had not decided, in the walk across the ballroom, exactly how much to say. She had approximately 11 years of practice in deciding exactly how much to say and when, and the math she ran in those 20 steps had come back to a single answer, not enough to explain everything, but enough to survive the night. "I need you to move me," she said, "somewhere in this building that isn't this room." "Why?" "Because the calls Caro has been making are not social calls. And I don't want to be standing in the middle of 200 people when whoever he's called arrives." Dante turned from the bar to face her fully. He was several inches taller than her, and the height usually meant nothing except physics. But in this moment, the full force of his attention was a physical thing, directional and heavy. "You're going to tell me who you are," he said. "Tonight, not later, tonight." "Yes." "And it's going to be bad." She held his gaze. "Probably for both of us." Something moved in his face, not fear. She was fairly certain Dante Moretti had not experienced fear in any conventional sense in a very long time, but something adjacent to it, the first cousin of fear. The recognition that you are standing in a situation whose edges you cannot see. "Come with me," he said. He took her through a door behind the bar that the bar staff used for restocking, down a short corridor that smelled of wine and cold stone, to a room that had the blank utility of a space that served rotating purposes: folding tables stacked against one wall, chairs, an empty coat rack, a single hanging bulb. A room between rooms. Private in the way that unimportant spaces are private. He closed the door, turned to face her. "Talk." She breathed in once. She had told this story before, fragments of it, edges of it. But she had never told all of it, not in sequence, not to someone whose reaction she could not predict or control. She looked at the far wall, and she said it. "My name is Serafina Ashcroft. My father was Clement Ashcroft. 11 years ago, my family was killed in an operation that was made to look like a rival attack. It was not a rival attack. It was an internal arrangement between 4 families who wanted the Ashcroft territory divided among themselves. I survived because I was not in the house when it happened. I was 18. I had my daughter 6 months later." She paused. "I have been living under a different name for 11 years. The room was very quiet. Dante had not moved. He was standing with his weight balanced evenly, arms at his sides, face doing nothing visible. She had seen him receive difficult information before, from Marcus, from his lieutenants, from lawyers, and he always looked like this, like the information was passing through a gate that decided what his face was allowed to show. "Ashcroft," he said. "Yes." "Clement Ashcroft's daughter." "Yes." He turned away from her, put one hand on the stack of folding tables, not gripping it, just resting, thinking. She could almost see it happening. The recalibration, the rapid reassessment of the last 3 years, every interaction re-examined under a new light. "You've been cleaning my house," he said. It was not quite a sentence. It was a man saying something out loud because he needed to hear it in order to fully believe it. "Yes." "For 3 years." "Yes." He turned back around. "Why?" "It was a good job. Nobody looks for an Ashcroft in a maid's uniform." "Why my house?" The question landed differently than the others. She had expected it. She had a version of an answer for it. But the full answer, the real answer, was a thing she was not ready to give him in this room tonight, in this context. "It was available," she said. He looked at her like he knew that was half a sentence. Before he could push it, his phone vibrated. He looked at it. His face, which had been doing almost nothing, did something then, a tightening around the eyes, a compression of the jaw. He looked up. "Marcus says there are 4 men in the building who weren't on the guest list." Serafina felt the cold come in from somewhere, not from outside, but from inside, from the place where the body stores the specific knowledge of what danger feels like when it is no longer abstract. "Carol moved fast," she said. "Yeah." Dante was already typing. "He always does." He pocketed the phone, looked at her. "The document, the evidence, whatever your father left you, you have it." She said nothing. "Serafina." "Yes," she said. "I have it. And it implicates people in this building." "It implicates people in this building," she confirmed, "including, very likely, people in your organization." The pause that followed was the longest of the evening. Dante Moretti stood in a storage room behind the bar of his own gala with a woman he had employed for 3 years as a maid and had brought tonight as a prop in a cruelty he had designed to entertain himself. And he looked at her across the bare concrete floor, and she watched him understand, fully, finally, without the buffer of disbelief, that he was standing inside a situation that had been larger than him since before he entered it. "How many?" he said. "How many what?" "How many people in my organization?" She held his gaze. "At least 2 that I can confirm. Possibly more." Something crossed his face then that she had not expected to see. Not rage. Rage was too simple. Something older than rage. Something that lived underneath it, in the place where a man keeps the things that make him feel like he cannot trust the floor beneath his feet. "Names," he said, and his voice had dropped to something that was barely above a breath but contained, in its quietness, the full weight of what he would do with those names once he had them. She opened her mouth. Somewhere above them, through the ceiling, through the floors, through the cheerful displacement of orchestral music and the murmur of 200 conversations, there was a sound. Flat, sharp, unmistakable. A gunshot. Then another. Then, muffled but immediate, the specific human sound of 200 people simultaneously realizing that something has gone terribly wrong. Not screaming yet, not running yet. Just that split-second collective intake of breath that comes right before everything breaks. The second shot was closer than the first. Dante was already moving before the echo died. Not toward the door, away from it, one hand catching Serafina's arm above the elbow and pulling her back against the wall beside the coat rack. Not rough. Precise. The grip of a man who has spent 20 years making the difference between a wrong move and a right one in the space of a breath. "Don't talk," he said. She didn't. Above them the ballroom had broken. She could hear it through the ceiling, the orchestral music cutting off mid-phrase with the specific awkwardness of musicians who have no protocol for gunfire, and then underneath that the sound she had anticipated, the one that had been half a second behind the shots. Voices rising, chairs scraping, heels on marble in too many directions at once. The whole elegant machinery of a 200-person gala coming apart at the structural level. Dante had his phone out, one hand still on her arm. He typed something with his thumb and 30 seconds later got a response and read it, and his jaw tightened in the way she had learned in 3 years of proximity meant the news was bad. "2 shooters on the mezzanine," he said. "Marcus has one contained. The other is loose on the main floor." "Caro's men." "Probably." He pocketed the phone, looked at the ceiling like he was calculating geometry. "There's a tunnel access behind the wine storage at the end of this corridor. Comes up in the east garden, 50 yards from the perimeter wall." "I know." He looked at her. "You know." "I've worked in this building for 3 years, Mr. Moretti. I know where everything is." Something moved in his face. Not quite amusement, the distant cousin of it, the version that appears when a man is genuinely surprised by someone and doesn't entirely know what to do with that. It lasted about 1 second. Then it was gone. "Stay behind me," he said. "I need something first." "We don't have 30 seconds." She moved to the stack of folding tables, reached behind them, and pulled out the item she had placed there 6 hours ago when she first arrived and was given 5 minutes alone in this room to put her dress on. A flat waterproof envelope, matte, black, the kind used for documents that need to survive things. She slid it inside the fabric of her dress against her ribs with the practiced ease of someone who had done this before. Dante watched her do it. "You knew," he said slowly. "You knew you'd end up in this room tonight." "I knew I might." "You planned for it." "I planned for everything." He stared at her for 2 seconds. "We are going to have a very long conversation." "Yes," she said. "If we live, we absolutely are, Rachid." The corridor behind the bar was empty. The wine storage was 40 feet of cold air and floor-to-ceiling shelving, bottles ranked and labeled with the particular obsessive precision of someone who treated wine as an asset class. Serafina followed Dante through the dark, one hand briefly touching a shelf for orientation, her heels making no sound because she had removed them at the entrance to the corridor and was carrying them in her left hand. The tunnel access was a steel door set into the back wall, behind a rack of reserve bottles that swung outward on a hidden pivot. Dante knew the mechanism without looking for it. Muscle memory, she noted, which meant he had used this exit before and used it enough times that his hands remembered without asking his brain. The tunnel was low-ceilinged and smelled of cold stone and age. A string of utility lights ran along the left wall, casting the kind of thin yellow light that made everything look like evidence. They moved fast. Dante first, then Serafina, her dress gathered in one hand to keep from snagging on the rough floor. Halfway through, he stopped. She nearly walked into his back. "What?" she started. He held up one hand, listening. She heard it too, after a second. Footsteps. Not behind them. Ahead. Measured, deliberate, the footsteps of someone who had not entered this tunnel in a hurry, but had entered it knowing where it went. Dante drew the weapon from his jacket with a movement so smooth and automatic it was almost uninteresting, the way breathing is uninteresting, and held it at his side. They waited. The figure that came around the curve in the tunnel was Marcus, head of security. Marcus, not Kitchen Marcus, moving with a slight unevenness to his gait that, when he got close enough for the utility light to reach him, resolved into a dark stain above his left hip. "Got tagged," Marcus said before Dante could ask. "Through and through, I'm fine." "The shooter?" "Down. The other one's been handled by Reyes." Marcus looked past Dante to Serafina. He had a broad, weathered face that was very good at not doing anything it didn't intend to, and right now it was doing something she couldn't read. "We have a problem." "One," Dante said. "Several, but one right now." Marcus held out his phone. On the screen was a photograph, a surveillance still, the kind that comes from a high-mounted interior camera, time-stamped from 40 minutes ago. It showed the main bar area. It showed 2 men in conversation. One of them was Vincent Caro. The other one was a man Serafina recognized. His name was Dom Reyes. He was Dante's second-in-command. He had been with Dante for 14 years. At the Christmas gathering 18 months ago, which Serafina had worked as part of the catering staff, she had watched Dante put his hand on this man's shoulder and say something that made them both laugh. Dante took the phone, looked at the photograph for 5 seconds. She watched him look at it the way she had watched him look at the newspaper every morning, the way he read things, absorbing rather than reacting, everything going inward. He handed the phone back. "When was this taken?" 7:42, 30 minutes before the shots. "Where's he now?" "I told you. He says he handled the second shooter." "Does he have the shooter?" Marcus paused. "He says the shooter is down." "Does he have a body?" Another pause. "No. So we have a photograph of my second talking to Caro before a hit attempt, and we have his word that the shooter is neutralized, and we have no way to verify either thing." Dante's voice was the same as it had been in the storage room. Quiet, precise, costing him something. "All right. Dante?" "I heard you, Marcus." A silence. "Get us out. We go to the Meridian safe house, not the one on Callaway. They'll know that one. The Meridian." Marcus nodded and moved ahead. Dante turned back to the tunnel and walked. Serafina walked beside him, and she did not speak, because there was nothing to say that would be more useful than the silence she was giving him to process the fact that a man he had trusted for 14 years had just been photographed conspiring with the man who had sent assassins into his building. She knew what that felt like. She had been living with a version of it for 11 years. The Meridian Safe House was a third-floor apartment above a dry cleaning business on the west side, accessed through the business's back storeroom and up a staircase that smelled permanently of solvent and heat. The kind of place that existed in the infrastructure of every serious organization. Not comfortable, not memorable, not findable, unless you already knew where to look. There were two men there when they arrived. One's Marcus had called ahead. They had the clean efficiency of people given a simple task. Secure the space, wait. And they did not ask questions about the woman in the emerald dress who arrived with no shoes and a face that had locked itself into an expression that gave away nothing. Dante took the main room. Marcus sat by the door. Serafina sat at the table in the center and placed the waterproof envelope in front of her and looked at it. "The men in your organization," she said, "that my father's documents implicate." Dante, standing by the window with his back to the room, said, "Tell me." "I need you to understand something first." She put her hands flat on the table on either side of the envelope. "What I'm about to show you is not a copy. It is the original. There are no other copies in existence. My father destroyed everything else before the house was taken to ensure that if the original was captured, whoever held it would have complete leverage and could not be outmaneuvered by a secondary source." He turned from the window. "You've been carrying the only copy." "For 11 years, yes. And you brought it here, tonight." "I brought it here because someone found me," she said. 11 years of hiding ended the moment you walked me into that ballroom. I had a choice. Run again or stop running. I stopped running." She looked up at him. "I would like it noted that the running was your idea." He sat down across from her. She opened the envelope. The documents inside were not dramatic to look at. Papers, printouts, 2 encrypted drives, a handwritten ledger index that her father had written in a compressed script so small it required magnification to read. She did not show him everything. She selected 3 pages and placed them on the table between them. He read. The room was very quiet. She watched his face while he read. She had become, in 11 years of being invisible and watchful in other people's spaces, extremely good at reading faces that were trying not to be read. And what she saw on Dante Moretti's face while he went through the first document was a sequence she recognized. Recognition, resistance to what the recognition implied. The brief internal struggle between what you know and what you want to know, and then the surrender to it. He set the page down. He picked up the second. He set that down too. He looked at the third for a long time without picking it up. "Reyes," he said. "Yes. He's been in my organization since I was 24 years old." "I know." "He was there when—" He stopped. Started again, differently. "The Ashcroft operation. 11 years ago. He was there. His name is in the ledger on page 4. He coordinated access to the estate's security system 48 hours before the attack. He's the reason my family's guard stood down." She kept her voice flat. She had practiced this too. The specific discipline of stating facts that destroyed her without letting the destruction reach her voice. "He was paid through a shell account in the Caro Consortium. The account number is on the second document." Dante pushed back from the table. Not violently, just the movement of a man who needs 6 more inches between himself and a surface because the surface has become intolerable. He stood, went back to the window. She let him stand there. 3 minutes. She counted. "The night they killed your family?" he said without turning around. "I was in this city." She said nothing. "I was 27. I knew Reyes was running an operation. I didn't ask the details." He put his hand against the window frame. "I didn't ask." "I know," she said. He turned around fast. "Don't." "Don't what?" "Don't say it like it's already settled, like you've already decided what that means." "I haven't decided anything." She met his eyes. "If I had, I wouldn't have gotten into the tunnel with you." The room held that for a moment. Marcus shifted by the door. "The question of what you knew or didn't know 11 years ago," he said, with the blunt practicality of a man who has been in enough bad rooms to know when philosophy needs to yield to logistics, is a question for another time. Right now, Reyes knows about this safe house. Dante looked at him. Calloway, he would expect, Marcus said, but he's been here twice. He knows it. He looked at the table, at the documents, at Serafina. And if Caro's people followed us through the tunnel, the window behind Dante exploded inward. Not a bullet, a stone, something thrown, followed immediately by the smell of something chemical, and then the thin, acrid thread of smoke beginning to rise from the object on the floor. And Marcus was already moving, already shouting something, and Dante had crossed the room and had Serafina's arm again, and the documents were still on the table. "The envelope," she said. "Leave it. I will not—" She pulled against his grip, scooped the documents back into the envelope with one motion that was faster than it should have been for someone in the dark, and in a dress, sealed it, and then he had her arm again, and they were moving toward the back of the apartment where Marcus had already found the second exit, a window onto a fire escape that groaned under their weight as they went down it, the cold of the Chicago night coming up to meet them from the alley below. She hit the alley floor in her bare feet and felt the cold concrete like a slap, and kept moving because stopping was not available. Behind them, the third-floor windows of the Meridian safe house filled with orange light. They moved through the alley for 2 blocks before Dante pulled them into a recessed doorway and stopped. Marcus was behind them. They stood in the shadow of the doorway and breathed. Serafina could hear her own heartbeat and chose to take that as useful information. It meant her body was still operating, which meant she still had options. "Phone," Dante said to Marcus. "Reyes could have access to the network." "I know. Call Ortega direct. Cell only, not the encrypted line." He looked at Serafina. "We need somewhere to go." She was breathing hard. The concrete was cold enough to make her feet ache. She had the envelope pressed flat against her ribs under her arm, and her dress had a long tear up the left side from the fire escape. And she was standing in an alley in a city she had navigated under a false name for 11 years, and she was calculating with the rapid, unglamorous clarity of someone for whom survival had never been a metaphor. "I have somewhere," she said. "Where?" "Somewhere Reyes doesn't know about. Somewhere nobody in your organization knows about." She looked at him. "Because it's mine, not yours. Not anything connected to this world." She paused. "My daughter is there." The word daughter fell into the conversation and changed the weight of everything underneath it. Dante looked at her for a moment. "How old?" 11. He did the math. She watched him do it. Watched the specific moment when he understood that Serafina's daughter had been 6 months old when the Ashcroft estate burned, which meant the child had been born into hiding, which meant the child had been living the same invisible life her mother had grown up in it, had known nothing else. "All right," he said. His voice had shifted slightly. She couldn't have said precisely how, but it had. "Lid." She turned and moved deeper into the alley. The cold came up from the ground through the soles of her feet, and she walked through it, the envelope flat against her ribs, the dress catching the ambient light of the city in a way that was absurdly conspicuous. 2 things true simultaneously. She was the most visible she had been in 11 years, and she had never been in more danger. Behind her, she heard Dante's footsteps. He was keeping pace. She thought about what he had said at the window. "I didn't ask." 3 words that could mean anything and did, for the moment, mean nothing concrete except the things she already knew. That the architecture of her family's betrayal was larger than she had built it in her head. That it extended into places she had not mapped. That the man walking behind her through a Chicago alley at midnight was either the most dangerous person she had encountered since the night her father died, or the only useful ally she currently possessed. She could not afford to be wrong about which. She walked faster. Marcus was still on the phone behind them, his voice low, and she caught 2 words from it, just 2, before the wind took the rest. She stopped walking. She turned. Marcus lowered the phone. He looked at Dante, then at her. His face was doing the thing it had done in the tunnel, the careful nothing that meant something was being held back. "What?" Dante said. "Ortega," Marcus said slowly. "He's been trying to reach you for 2 hours. Before the ball. Before the shots." He paused. He says Reyes came to him 3 days ago, told him there was a situation developing, asked him to confirm the location of an asset Moretti had been keeping close. The alley was very quiet. An asset, Dante repeated. He described her, Marcus said. The asset, a woman. Approximate age, physical description, employment. He looked at Serafina with an expression that was not unkind and was not soft and was simply honest in the way that men who deal with bad news professionally learn to be honest. He knew about her before tonight, before the ball. Marcus paused once more. Before you invited her. Serafina felt it then. The cold that had been coming from the ground shifted and came from somewhere internal, from the place in the chest where the body stores the things it least wants to know. She turned to look at Dante. His face was doing nothing, absolutely nothing, which was, she had learned, the most dangerous version of his face. You didn't choose me randomly, she said. Her voice was so level it barely sounded like a voice. For the ball. Tonight. He said nothing. Someone told you to bring me. Into that room. Someone knew I was in your house, and they told you to surface me, to make me visible, to bring me into a room full of the people who have been looking for me for 11 years. She took a step toward him, the envelope pressed against her ribs like a heartbeat. Was it Reyes? The silence stretched out to its absolute limit. I didn't know who you were, he said. I want you to understand that. That's not what I asked. Serafina was it Reyes. Dante Moretti, who had not flinched from a gunshot, who had not flinched from a photograph of betrayal, who had stood at a window and absorbed the news that 14 years of loyalty had been a performance, looked at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before, and said very quietly, He told me you were someone I should watch, that you'd been placed in my house by a competitor. He told me the ball would be an opportunity to expose you. He stopped. I thought I was playing someone else's game. Another pause, the longest of the night. It was my game that got played. The words hung in the alley air and did not dissolve. They stayed there between them, solid as brick, and Serafina looked at Dante's face and saw the thing she had not expected to see. Not defiance, not calculation, not the particular armor of a man managing his exposure. Just the stripped, uncomfortable fact of a man who had been used and knew it and was not going to pretend otherwise. She could have said many things. She said, How long has Reyes been feeding you information about me? 3 weeks. What exactly did he tell you? That you were an informant, placed by the Kellner family to monitor my operations. That bringing you public would force their hand and give me leverage. He looked at the wall beside her head, then back at her face. He framed it as strategy. I thought it was mine. It was his. Yes. He used you to surface me, to bring me into a room full of Caro's allies so they could confirm my identity and move on me in a public space where the chaos would cover the operation. She said it evenly, assembling it out loud the way you assemble something broken to understand exactly what broke. If the shooting had gone as planned, I would be dead in your ballroom, and the evidence in this envelope would either be taken from my body or never found, and Reyes would have managed the aftermath from inside your organization. Yes, Dante said again. The word cost him something each time. And you would have been the man who brought the target to the room. He didn't answer that. He didn't need to. Marcus had lowered the phone. He was watching both of them with the careful attention of a man who understands he is witnessing something that is going to determine the next several hours of his life. Serafina pressed the envelope harder against her ribs. Breathed once. The cold concrete under her feet was not a problem she had time to give attention to. The tear in her dress was not a problem she had time to give attention to. The full inventory of what had just collapsed, 11 years of careful architecture, her cover, her anonymity, the one plan she'd had, which was to keep being invisible until she found a moment to use the documents safely. That also was not something she could afford to open right now. Where is Reyes? She said. Marcus checked his phone. Last confirmed position was the estate, but that was 40 minutes ago. Caro. Unknown. The cathedral on Weston and 9th, she said, the abandoned one. The Ashcroft family used it as a secondary operations base before my father moved everything to the estate. Reyes would know that from the documents. It's referenced in the ledger. She looked at Dante. If they want the original, they'll go where they think I'll go. Because it's the only place in this city that's mine. You think they'll be waiting? I think they're already there. Dante looked at Marcus. Something passed between them. Not words, not gesture, just the compressed communication of two men who have spent a long time in the same world. Ortega, Dante said. 20 minutes out. He's bringing 6. Tell him the cathedral, and tell him quiet entry only. If Reyes has people there, I want them contained, not spooked. His jaw set. And Marcus. Reyes is mine. Marcus nodded, made the call. Dante looked at Serafina. You go to your daughter. I'm coming with you. That's not... The documents are mine, she said. The evidence is mine. If Reyes gets his hands on them before I can present them publicly, none of this matters. Not your people, not Caro, not any of it. He destroys the originals, and it's 11 years of my life that disappear with them. She held his gaze without concession. I'm coming. He looked at her for 2 seconds. She could see him calculating, and she could see him arriving at the same answer she had already arrived at, which was that she was correct, and he did not have a better option. You stay back, he said. Until I say. Agreed. I mean it. I heard you the first time. Natan. They came to the cathedral from the north, through a neighborhood that had been declining since before Serafina was born and had completed its decline sometime in the years she'd been away from it, the storefronts empty, the streetlights at half capacity, the silence, the particular silence of a place that has given up expecting company. The cathedral itself rose out of the block like something that had refused to accept the neighborhood's decision. Stone facade, 2 towers, windows dark. The kind of building that was structurally magnificent and functionally useless, and had been both those things for 30 years, which was why her father had found it useful. The official address belonged to a holding company that no longer existed. The keys, such as they were, existed in a form that didn't require keys. Ortega had arrived ahead of them with 4 men, not 6. 2 had been redirected to cover the estate, he explained in 3 sentences when Dante reached him at the north entrance. A side door set back in a stone archway that someone had covered with plywood that swung inward if you knew where to push. Ortega was compact, 50s, with close-cropped silver hair and the demeanor of a man who had spent decades making complicated things run smoothly and had developed a permanent mild frown from the effort. He looked at Serafina once, and then at Dante, and Dante gave him nothing, and Ortega accepted that and moved on. 2 heat signatures on the upper level, Ortega said quietly, holding up a phone showing a thermal scan from a device one of his men had run along the exterior. 1 in the nave, possibly more in the basement. The stone's too thick to read through. Reyes. Can't tell from this. Dante checked the weapon he'd had since the estate. Ortega's men moved into position around the entrance with the quiet efficiency of people who had rehearsed this kind of thing enough times that the rehearsal had become the thing itself. Serafina pressed herself against the stone arch and felt the cold of it against her bare shoulders, and did not shiver, because shivering was a response to a stimulus she had already decided to deprioritize. There is a secondary entrance, she said quietly. East side. Below ground level. A coal door. It opens into the basement directly. She looked at Dante. If they have the basement, that's where they'll be keeping whatever they came with. Equipment. Maybe people. Ortega looked at Dante. Take 2 men. East side, Dante said. Serafina goes with you. I said I was coming. You said you'd stay back until I said. His eyes found hers in the dark. I'm saying go with Ortega. The basement gives you a position. If the documents need to move, you need a path that isn't through the main space. A pause. I need to know you're not standing in the middle of whatever happens in there. She looked at him. She had 11 years of practice assessing when a man was giving her instructions to control her, and when a man was giving her instructions because he had a plan that required her cooperation and knew she was smart enough to understand the difference. She went with Ortega. So the coal door was where she said it was. Ortega's man had it open in 40 seconds with a tool he carried for exactly that type of lock, and they went down 6 stone steps into the dark of the cathedral basement, and Ortega had a light but kept it low, just enough to navigate. The basement was vast and low-ceilinged and smelled of stone and old wood, and something chemical underneath it that Serafina identified after 2 seconds as accelerant. She grabbed Ortega's arm. "Fuel," she said. He stopped, swept the light in a wider arc. Along the east wall, in a row with the disciplined arrangement of someone who had prepared this in advance, were 4 metal canisters, the kind used for industrial solvent. She could see the dark stain on the floor where at least one had been opened and partially distributed. "They were going to burn it," she said. "The building?" "The building, the documents, me, if they could manage it." She said it without any particular effect. Reyes has been in this business long enough to know that the cleanest resolution to a leverage problem is to remove the leverage and the person holding it simultaneously. Ortega's man had already moved to the canisters. He checked them, looked at Ortega, made a small negative gesture with his head. Not lit, not triggered, no visible ignition mechanism attached, which meant the trigger was either upstairs or the plan hadn't reached that stage yet. Above them, through the stone ceiling, came the sound of footsteps. More than one person, moving fast. Then Dante's voice, distant but distinct, saying a single name. "Reyes." They came up through the nave access stairs in time to see it. The cathedral's main space was enormous and dark except for portable work lights that someone had set up at the far end, near the raised area that had once been the chancel. And in that cold white industrial light, the scene was arranged with the blunt theatricality of something that had been designed to be a conclusion. Reyes was standing in the center of the space. He was a broad man, heavy through the shoulders, with a face that Serafina had seen at the estate twice, and registered and filed and cross-referenced and confirmed against the ledger in the envelope against her ribs. He was not alone. 2 men flanked him, both armed, and he was looking at Dante, who had come in through the main nave with Marcus beside him, with an expression that was something between calculation and what looked horrifyingly like relief, like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had finally set it down. 14 years, Dante said. He stopped 30 feet from Reyes. His voice carried without effort in the stone space. "You've been running a parallel operation for 14 years. "Longer," Reyes said. His voice was steady, conversational almost. "I was in the Caro consortium before I came to you. You recruited me out of it, which they found useful. I built you. You gave me a platform." Reyes tilted his head slightly. "There's a difference." "Not to me." "I know." Something in Reyes's expression shifted. Not regret, the shape of it without the content. A man doing an impression of a feeling he had processed past a long time ago. "That's the problem with you, Dante. You build things, and then you feel entitled to them. People, organizations, loyalty. You act like because you constructed it, it belongs to you permanently. Nothing belongs to you permanently. You should know that by now." "The Ashcroft family," Dante said. "You were part of it." Reyes didn't answer. "Say it." "Yes." Flat, undecorated. "I coordinated the security breach. I won't apologize for it. It was a business decision, and it accomplished what it was designed to accomplish." Marcus, at Dante's shoulder, made a sound that was not quite a word. 42 people, Serafina said. Her voice came out of the dark at the edge of the light, and Reyes turned toward it with the controlled speed of a man who knew she was somewhere in the building and had been waiting for her to surface. His eyes found her as she stepped forward, Ortega's man at her back, the envelope in her hand now rather than against her ribs. She held it up. 42 people in and around that estate, she said. Staff, guards, family. Not all of them were Ashcroft. Some of them were people who worked there the same way I worked in his house, because it was a job, and they needed a job. My father's ledger documents, all of them. Names, positions, time of death, where it was recorded. She kept her voice level. She kept walking forward, slowly, into the edge of the light. Your name is in it 17 times, Mr. Reyes. 17 documented contacts with the Caro Consortium in the 90 days before the attack. Reyes looked at the envelope. The calculation in his face was fast and visible. You have the original. I have the original. There are no copies. There are no copies. One of the men flanking him shifted his weight. The other was watching Dante's hands. Then this is simple, Reyes said. You give me the documents. Everyone here goes home. Whatever you've built for yourself in the last 11 years, you keep it. Your daughter, your life, your name, you keep all of it. You disappear again. He spread his hands, reasonable, open, the gesture of a man offering something fair. Or we do this the other way. The other way, she said, is what you've been trying to do all night, and it hasn't worked yet. The night's not over. No, she agreed, it isn't. What happened next was fast. She had expected it to be fast. Reyes was not a man who delivered ultimatums and then waited for deliberation, and the gesture with his hands was not an offer, it was a signal. And she had been watching his hands, not his face, which was why she was already moving left when the man on his right raised his weapon. The shot cracked through the cathedral and hit the stone behind where she had been standing, and the sound of it rolled through the space like thunder finding its echo. Dante moved. Marcus moved. Ortega's man came forward from behind Serafina, and the space broke into the particular controlled chaos of trained people operating in a dark environment with competing objectives and inadequate light. The work lights at the chancel end throwing hard shadows that moved as people moved, and Serafina hit the ground behind a stone pillar and pressed her back to it and held the envelope against her chest with both arms and breathed. Above her, shouting, feet on stone, another shot from a different direction. Ortega's position, aimed away from her. The sound of something heavy hitting the floor. A voice she recognized as Marcus saying something in a language she didn't speak. Then silence for 2 seconds that felt structural, like silence that was holding something up. Then Reyes's voice from somewhere that was not where he had been standing. Dante, stop. She looked around the edge of the pillar. Reyes had moved during the chaos to the north transept, one of the shallow alcoves where the cathedral's arms branched off the main space. He was there now, and he was not alone. He had his arm across the throat of a figure he had pulled from somewhere in the dark, and he had his weapon at the figure's temple. And the figure was small and was wearing a coat that was too large for her, and had her hands raised and her chin up with the particular terrified dignity of a child who has been told her entire life to be brave. Lily, Serafina's daughter, 11 years old, standing in the north transept of an abandoned cathedral at midnight with a man's arm across her throat. The world contracted to a single point. She was on her feet before she had decided to stand. The pillar was behind her. The distance to the transept was 40 feet of open floor. Every sensible calculation she had ever made in 11 years of surviving things told her to stop moving, and she stopped moving because Ortega's hand was on her arm, gripping it, and she turned to look at him with an expression that she knew, from the way he flinched, was not an expression she had ever worn in front of another person before. He got to her, she said. Her voice didn't sound like her voice. He got to her before we left the apartment. Someone was already watching her. Serafina, let go of my arm. You can't. Let go. He let go. She looked across the 40 feet of stone floor to where Reyes was standing with her daughter, and she said, loudly enough to fill the space, "She has nothing to do with this." "She's an Ashcroft," Reyes said. His voice was entirely steady. "She has everything to do with this. She's 11 years old. Her age is not a factor in what she represents." He pressed the weapon slightly harder against Lily's temple, and Lily made no sound, which was the bravest thing Serafina had ever witnessed, because she herself was barely managing to breathe. "The documents. On the floor. Now." Dante, from somewhere to the right, said, "Reyes, think." "I have been thinking. For 14 years I have been thinking. Every decision, every contingency, every piece of this has been thought through." A pause. "I didn't want it to reach the child. That was not the plan. But the plan required flexibility, and this is what flexibility looks like." He looked at Serafina. "Documents. Floor." She looked at the envelope in her hands. 11 years. Every city she had moved through, every name she had shed, every morning in the dark putting on a uniform that was not hers and walking to someone else's house and being invisible in it. Every night making dinner and watching her daughter do homework and telling herself that this was temporary, that the documents existed, that when the time was right, she would use them and it would mean something. She looked at Lily. Lily was looking back at her. Her daughter's face was white and her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set in a way that looked, in this terrible cold light, exactly like Serafina's own jaw, when Serafina was deciding something she had no good options about. Her daughter looked at her and gave the smallest possible nod. Something in Serafina's chest cracked along a line that had been developing for 11 years. She looked at Reyes. "If I give you the documents," she said, "you let her walk to me. When I have the documents in my hand, before she walks first, then you get them." She held the envelope up. "You want them intact. You want the originals undamaged because you need to destroy them properly, which means you need them dry and whole and accounted for. If I drop them and run, you get paper on a stone floor in a building that smells like accelerant." She lowered the envelope to her side. "She walks. Then you get what you came for." The space was absolutely still. Reyes looked at her. He was calculating. She could see it, the specific rhythm of a mind moving through possibilities. And the calculation was taking longer than it should have, which told her that he knew she was right about the documents and was trying to find the place where she was wrong about the leverage. And Reyes was not finding it. The place where she was wrong about the leverage. He was looking for it, and it wasn't there. And the calculation on his face cycled through its possibilities and came back empty. And Serafina watched it happen with the particular patience of a woman who had spent 11 years learning that the most dangerous thing you can do to a powerful man is give him a problem he cannot solve with force. "She walks," Serafina said again, quiet, absolute. "Then you get them." 3 seconds. Reyes lowered his arm from Lily's throat. "Go," he said. Lily moved. She did not run. She walked, fast, the coat too large swinging around her knees, and she crossed the stone floor, and Serafina went to her knees as her daughter reached her and caught her with both arms and held her. The envelope crushed between them, and felt Lily's hands grip the back of her dress and hold on with the specific, desperate strength of a child who has been very frightened and has been very brave about it, and is now done being brave. "I've got you," Serafina said against her daughter's hair. "I've got you." "I know," Lily said. Her voice was muffled, steady. "I knew you'd come." Serafina held her for exactly 3 seconds. 3. Then she straightened, put her hands on Lily's shoulders, looked at her face. "Go to Ortega, the man by the pillar. Stay with him. Don't move from him." Lily looked at her. "Mom? Lily." Her daughter read her face and went. Serafina stood. She turned to face Reyes across the 40 feet of floor. She held up the envelope, and she dropped it. Not to the floor. She opened her fingers and let it fall, and in the same motion she reached into the neckline of her dress and produced the encrypted drive, the one that had been against her skin since she dressed for the ball 12 hours ago, the one she had not shown Dante in the storage room, the one that was not referenced in anything she had given him. And she held it up between her thumb and forefinger in the cold white light so that Reyes could see it clearly. "The drive," she said, "has everything the documents have, plus financial routing that the paper records don't contain, digital footprints, server logs from the Caro Consortium's internal network." She paused. "I accessed their system 4 months ago. I've had their complete operational records since April." The room was very still. "You said there were no copies," Reyes said. "I said there were no copies of the documents." She held the drive steady. "I didn't say anything about the drive." Something moved in Reyes's face. The calculation collapsed inward, and what replaced it was something older and simpler and considerably more dangerous. The expression of a man who realizes, fully and finally, that he has been outmaneuvered by someone he had spent 14 years not taking seriously enough. He raised his weapon. So did Dante. The shot that fired was not from either of them. It came from the mezzanine above, from Marcus, who had circled during the negotiation with the patience of a man who understood that the most useful position is sometimes the one nobody is watching. And it took Reyes in the right shoulder with the precision of someone who had made a deliberate choice about where to aim. Reyes went down to one knee. The weapon clattered on the stone. His 2 men turned toward the mezzanine. Ortega's people closed the space in 4 seconds. What followed was not elegant. It never was. Serafina had built enough of a picture of how these things ended from the documents she'd spent years studying, and the picture was always the same. Not a clean resolution, but a series of rapidly deteriorating situations managed one at a time, the adrenaline burning off in stages and leaving behind the physical reality of what had happened in a building's worth of cold stone and bad light. Reyes's 2 men were contained without additional shots. One of Ortega's men had a broken finger from a piece of it she didn't see. Reyes himself was on the floor of the north transept, shoulder wound being compressed by Marcus, with the impersonal efficiency of a man who needed the information still inside the person he was keeping alive. Serafina picked up the envelope from the floor. The documents were intact. She checked each one, methodically, in the light from the portable work lamps, while around her men moved and voices were low, and Ortega spoke quietly into his phone. Dante came to stand beside her. She did not look up from the documents. "The drive," he said. "Yes." "How long?" "I told you, 4 months. I accessed their network through a contact I've been developing for 2 years. A former IT administrator for one of the Caro subsidiaries who had his own reasons for wanting the consortium's records seen by the right people." She checked the last page, put everything back, sealed the envelope. "I didn't tell you about it because I didn't know yet which side of this you were on." He absorbed that without visible reaction. "And now," she looked up at him. His jacket was torn at the shoulder seam. There was a cut along his left jaw that had dried to a thin dark line. He looked like what he was. A man who had just learned that his organization had been infiltrated for over a decade, that a woman he'd employed as domestic staff had been carrying evidence that implicated his own people, and that the elaborate machinery of control he had spent 20 years constructing had been, at its foundation, compromised. He looked like a man standing on the far side of something that had broken. "Now," she said, "I think we have a conversation about what happens next." Org. They had that conversation in the cathedral's small side vestibule, a stone room off the nave with a wooden bench along one wall, and a window that had been boarded over from the outside for so long that the board had become structural. Lily was asleep on Ortega's jacket on the bench, which said something about the specific exhaustion of an 11-year-old who had been frightened beyond her capacity and had processed it into unconsciousness. Serafina sat at the other end of the bench. Dante stood. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "The drive," he said. "What's on it?" "Everything necessary to dismantle the Caro consortium legally. Financial crimes, money laundering, documentation of the contracted operations, including the Ashcroft attack. Enough for federal prosecution on 12 counts." She looked at her hands. "I had 2 options. Deliver it to law enforcement directly, which would have required surfacing and exposing myself and Lily before I had any protection in place. Or find a moment when the evidence could be presented in a context that made it impossible to suppress." She looked up. "The Black Crown Ball was always my target, not the way tonight went. I planned to approach it differently, more controlled. But the gathering itself, every family present, every compromised political contact, present the evidence in front of all of them simultaneously, and the story becomes impossible to contain because too many people are implicated in too many different ways." Dante was quiet for a moment. "You were going to do this regardless of whether I chose you as an escort. I'd been working toward it for 2 years. You accelerated the timeline considerably. And nearly got you killed." "Yes." She paused. "You should know that's not something I'm prepared to simply set aside." "I know. You were told I was an enemy, and you used me without verifying it, without asking me directly, without—" She stopped, looked at the sleeping shape of her daughter, started again. "I understand the world you operate in. I was born into one very much like it. I understand that trust is not the default, and verification is survival. But you had 3 years. 3 years of proximity, and you never once looked at me as a person who might have a context you didn't know." He said nothing. "Say something," she said. "There's nothing I can say that adjusts what happened." "No, there isn't." She looked at him. "So what I need to know is what you're going to do about what comes after." Reyes will be turned over with the documentation. His testimony in exchange for reduced sentencing Marcus is already working that channel. It implicates Caro directly, which, with the drive, gives federal investigators enough to move within the week. He paused. The men in my organization who are connected to the consortium, there are 2 I can confirm, possibly a 3rd. They'll be removed. Removed? From the organization, turned over. He met her eyes. I'm not going to insult you by pretending I've run a clean operation, but the Ashcroft operation, what Reyes facilitated, that was done without my knowledge, and the people responsible for it will be accounted for. She studied his face, the cut on his jaw, the particular quality of his stillness, which she had spent 3 years reading and now read differently, with the full context of knowing who she was when she was doing the reading. Caro, she said. He ran before the shots started. He's already on his way out of the city. Dante's mouth tightened. He won't get far. I don't want him handled. I want him prosecuted. She held his gaze. That's not negotiable. No private resolution. He goes through a legal process where what happened to my family becomes part of the public record. A pause. That's harder. I know. It means testimony. Your testimony. It means surfacing completely and permanently. Serafina Ashcroft becomes a real person again in the public record. Yes. With everything that entails for your security. For Lily's. Yes. She looked at her daughter. She's 11 years old and she spent tonight with a gun at her head because I raised her in hiding and the hiding stopped working. She deserves to grow up with her actual name. The room held that for a moment. Dante looked at the floor, then at the wall. Then, finally, in the particular way of a man who has spent 20 years looking at things only when he was ready to deal with what he saw, at her. I will provide security, he said. For the transition period, for as long as it takes the legal process to neutralize the threat. My people, the ones who weren't compromised, are capable of that, and I will commit them to it. He paused. I understand that accepting anything from me is complicated right now. Complicated, she said, is one word for it. What's another word? She almost smiled. It didn't quite make it to her face. Necessary, she said. Ito. The drive went to a federal contact Alara Voss provided. Alara, who appeared at the cathedral at 3 a.m. with no explanation for how she knew to come, and 2 lawyers in tow. The kind of lawyers who specialized in the intersection of criminal law and national financial crimes, and who reviewed the drive's contents in the vestibule while Lily slept through all of it. The Caro Consortium's legal exposure, one of the lawyers said without effect, was extraordinary. Vincent Caro was detained at a private airfield outside the city at 4:47 in the morning. Serafina was not present for it. She was sitting in a coffee shop 6 blocks from Mrs. Okafor's apartment, drinking coffee that was too hot and not doing anything about it, while Lily ate a piece of toast across from her and said nothing because she was 11, and she understood, in the way that children raised in complicated circumstances understand things, that some mornings were mornings you just sat through. Ortega came in at 5:15. Caro's in federal custody, he said, sitting down without being invited. Reyes is in surgery. His testimony agreement is in progress. He looked at Lily, who looked back at him with her mother's eyes, and nodded at her with the respectful brevity of a man who was reassessing what he thought he knew about a lot of things. The Ball's attorney team is managing the property damage situation, and he paused. Dante wants to know if you're all right. Tell him I'll answer that question later. Ortega nodded, left. Lily ate her toast. Is it over? She asked. Serafina wrapped both hands around her coffee. The part where we're in danger, yes. She looked at her daughter. The part where we figure out what comes next, that's just starting. Lily considered this with the seriousness of a child who had been given accurate information about hard things her whole life and had developed a corresponding tolerance for complexity. Do we get to use our real name now? Yes. Lily was quiet for a moment. Ashcroft, she said, trying the sound of it. That's a good name. Your grandfather thought so. Tell me about him. Serafina looked at her daughter's face in the early morning light coming through the coffee shop window, the jaw that came from her father and the eyes that were her own, and the particular quality of endurance that Lily had developed all by herself, without a template, just by living the life she'd been given and not breaking under it. "I will," she said. "I'll tell you everything." The months that followed were not simple. Nothing about the legal process was simple. Nothing about the reconstruction of a life that had been lived under a false name for 11 years was simple. The Ashcroft estate was gone, burned, rebuilt into something else, belonging to interests that would take years of legal process to untangle. But the financial holdings that Alara had described, the trust that had been generating quietly in the background while everyone assumed the heir was dead, that was real, and it was significant, and navigating it required the kind of sustained attention that left very little room for anything else. Serafina hired 3 lawyers, 1 accountant, and a security consultant who had previously worked a level of government she was not asked to specify. She moved herself and Lily into a place that was larger than the apartment, and smaller than anything the Ashcroft name might have historically implied, in a neighborhood that was decent and unremarkable and exactly what she wanted. Lily changed schools, made 2 friends in the first month, which Serafina counted as evidence of a resilience she had not manufactured and could not take credit for. She testified 3 times, once before a federal grand jury, once in a deposition that lasted 11 hours and covered, in detail that she had not anticipated being required to provide in quite such granular sequence, every aspect of the 11 years she had spent in hiding. Once, briefly, in a preliminary hearing for the prosecution of Vincent Caro on charges that included, this was the specific language, the language she had spent 11 years working toward, conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and financial crimes spanning a period of 14 years. The morning after the Caro hearing, she sat at the kitchen table in the new apartment and drank coffee and did not do anything else for 45 minutes. Just sat. Lily was at school. The apartment was quiet, in a way that was different from the silence of hiding. Not the silence of suppression, not the silence of someone making themselves small, just ordinary morning silence, the sound of a day that did not require her to be anything other than present in it. She was still sitting there when her phone rang. Dante. She looked at his name on the screen for 2 rings, picked up. "The Caro hearing," he said. "I heard it went well." "It went adequately. Well is a description that belongs to outcomes, not process." "Fair." A pause. "How's Lily?" "She has a science project due Thursday that she has not started. She's fine." He made a sound that was almost a laugh. Didn't quite complete it. "I wanted to tell you, Reyes's testimony was formally entered yesterday. The federal case against the remaining consortium members is fully built. The prosecutors told Marcus it's the most complete financial crime documentation they've received in 20 years. Another pause. "Your father built that record carefully." "He was a careful man. He raised a careful daughter." She looked at the kitchen wall. At the ordinary surface of it, unpainted plaster, a small water stain near the ceiling that she had been meaning to address. The completely undramatic evidence of a space that was hers. "Dante." She kept her voice even. "What are you doing?" "Right now." "Yes." "Trying to find a way to ask if you'd have dinner with me that doesn't sound like what it is." She was quiet for a moment. "What is it?" "A question I should have asked differently 3 years ago." He paused, or asked at all, instead of deciding what you were without asking you anything. She had thought, in the months since the cathedral, about what she felt about Dante Moretti. She had thought about it with the same methodical honesty she brought to every other problem, and the answer she had arrived at was not simple, and she had not expected it to be. He had used her. Carelessly, without malice, which was in some ways worse than malice. Carelessness implied that the harm done to her hadn't required any particular intention, that she had simply been in the path of a man not looking where he was going. And yet he had also pulled her behind a wall when the shooting started. He had gotten her out through the tunnel. He had stood in an alley in the middle of the night and said, "I didn't ask," with the full understanding of what not asking had cost. People were not single things. She knew that. She had been living proof of it for 11 years. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's more than I expected." "Don't make it into something it isn't yet." "Understood." She could hear him settling into the honest version of himself that appeared sometimes, the version that existed underneath the 20 years of construction. For what it's worth, and I know what it's worth right now, which is not a great deal, you were extraordinary. What you built, what you carried, what you did in that building." He paused. "I've been in this city a long time. I've known a lot of people who thought they were serious. You are the only person I've met who actually was." She sat with that for a moment. "I'll call you," she said. "About dinner." She hung up, looked at the phone, looked at the kitchen wall, looked at the small water stain that she had been meaning to address for 3 weeks. She got up and got a pen and wrote plaster repair on the notepad on the counter under Lily Science Project Thursday, an accountant, Tuesday 2 p.m., and call Mom's old attorney Estate Subtrust. An ordinary list. The list of a person with a name, in a place that was hers, with a future that was not yet built but was, at least, available to be built. The charity gala was held 6 months later in spring, in the same ballroom where it had all begun. It was not Dante's event. It was organized by a coalition of civic organizations, and the Ashcroft name was listed among the donors, which was the first time that name had appeared in any public document in 11 years. And Serafina had looked at it in the printed program for a long time before she put it down. She wore a dark blue dress, not emerald. That color belonged to a different night, a different version of things, and she did not need to revisit it. The blue was quieter. She wore her own earrings, small gold ones that had been her mother's, and that she had carried in a small pouch through 11 years of moving and had never once lost. Lily was with Mrs. Okafor, who had been informed of the complete situation in a conversation that Serafina had approached with some apprehension, and that Mrs. Okafor had received with the unflappable dignity of a woman who had simply been waiting to be told what she had already known for several years. Alara Voss was there, with 2 people Serafina didn't know and didn't need to. Marcus was there, near the door, in a suit that fit him properly, which she noted as an upgrade. Ortega was at the bar, not drinking, occupying space with the patient competence that seemed to be his natural mode. She arrived at the same silver doors. No announcement, no coordinated entrance. She just came through the doors and walked in, and the room did not go silent this time, because this time there was no mystery to resolve. The room knew who she was. The room had been watching the news for 6 months. The room had read the federal indictments and the financial exposés and the long, careful, retrospective pieces that had been written about the Ashcroft family and what had happened to them and what the last surviving member had done in the 11 years since. People looked up. Some nodded. A few came to speak to her, not out of obligation, not out of the complex political calculus that had animated the Black Crown Ball, but in the ordinary way of people acknowledging someone they recognized. She worked the room slowly. She accepted a glass of water and held it without drinking it, which was a habit she was working on breaking. She spoke to 3 people she had identified as useful to the legitimate business interests she was in the early stages of building. A woman who ran a commercial real estate fund, a man who did impact investment in underserved neighborhoods, another woman who had started a foundation focused on economic mobility. She was talking to the third person when she became aware that Dante had come to stand a few feet away, waiting for a pause in the conversation without inserting himself into it. She finished the sentence she was in the middle of, excused herself, turned to face him. He was in a black jacket and no tie, which was the first time she had ever seen him without a tie, and it made him look slightly like a different person, or perhaps like the same person with one layer of the construction removed. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. "You came," she said. "You called about dinner. This seemed adjacent." "It is absolutely not adjacent to dinner. I'm working up to it." He looked at the room, back at her. "How does it feel?" She considered the question seriously. "Like a room," she said finally. "Like an ordinary room with people in it." She paused. 6 months ago it felt like a stage. Now it just feels like a room. That's progress. It is. He was quiet for a moment. Around them, the event moved in its ordinary way. Conversations, the gentle displacement of music under voices, the specific warmth of a room that was large but not cold, expensive but not hostile. "I've been thinking about what you said," he said, "at the cathedral, about power and what it does to how you see people." He wasn't looking at her when he said it, and she understood that was intentional. That the specific difficulty of saying this required not having her face in front of him while he said it. I've spent 20 years in a world that rewards you for treating people as assets, things you deploy, things you position. He paused. You were a person in my house for 3 years, and I never once asked what your day had been. No, she said. You didn't. I'm asking now. How was your day? She looked at him. The cut on his jaw had healed clean and left no mark. His hands were in his jacket pockets, and he was looking at the room, and there was something in the set of his shoulders that was different from the Dante Moretti she had watched across a desk every morning for 3 years. Something that was either openness or its first approximation, the version of it that appears when a person has decided to stop defaulting to armor. It was a reasonable day, she said. Lily started her science project. I spoke to the estate attorney about the subtrust. I had good coffee in the morning. She considered. It was the kind of day I'm going to spend the rest of my life being grateful for. He turned to look at her then. She held his gaze. Dinner, she said. Thursday. I'll choose the place. All right. And Dante. She waited until she had his full attention. If you ever decide, again, to deploy me as a variable in someone else's game without telling me, that will be the end of it. Any version of whatever this is. She said it without heat, without threat, just as information. The kind of information a person provides when they have decided they are done arranging themselves around other people's blind spots. I'm done being invisible. For anyone. He looked at her for a long moment. Something settled in his face. Not submission, not the collapse of ego, but the specific gravity of a person taking something seriously. Understood, he said. She turned back to the room. The gala moved around them, the music under the voices, the spring night outside the tall windows, the ordinary texture of a world continuing to exist. 11 years ago, she had learned to make herself small enough to disappear into. She had learned the specific discipline of not being seen, of flattening herself against the walls of other people's lives, and leaving no impression, and she had been very good at it, and it had kept her daughter alive, and it had cost her things she was only beginning to fully count. She was done counting. She took a sip from the glass she'd been holding all evening and tasted water, cold and plain and sufficient, and stood in the middle of a room that knew her name and breathed. Outside, the city moved in its ordinary way, indifferent, loud, continuous, asking nothing of anyone. Lily was home with Mrs. Okafor learning fractions or avoiding learning fractions, which amounted to the same thing on a Thursday evening. The legal process ground forward on its own momentum, patient and slow, and eventually conclusive. The Ashcroft name was in the program of a charity gala, listed under donors, in print, permanent. Seraphina Vale, who was Seraphina Ashcroft, who had always been Seraphina Ashcroft, who had carried that name through 11 years of careful erasure like a coal burning in a closed fist, stood in a room that was just a room, and was just herself, which turned out, after everything, to be entirely enough.